Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. This is David Shoemaker, and I'd like to welcome you to Living Thelema. Now, this segment's going to cover creating effective magical invocations. And before I get into detail on that, I just want to make a differentiation and explain a little bit about the difference between evocation and invocation. It's very important to understand. Many of you probably are aware of this distinction, but just in case, I want to say a word or two about it. Now, evocation, that's EVO, evocation, is essentially calling a force outward, projecting it outward into a triangle or a similar sort of mechanism of externalizing the force, or at least relating to it as if it's an externalized force, however you want to think of it. This is generally used for low yet erratic entities like goetic spirits, planetary spirits, and intelligences, and things like that. The magician is in a role of commanding and controlling the spirit. Now, Crowley has an interesting comment about evocation from Magic in Theory and Practice. He says, the magician soon discards evocation almost altogether. Only rare circumstances demand any action whatever on the material plane. The magician devotes himself entirely to the invocation of a god, and as soon as his balance approaches perfection, he ceases to invoke any partial god, only that god vertically above him in his path. And so a man who perhaps took up magic merely with the idea of acquiring knowledge, love, or wealth finds himself irrevocably committed to the performance of the great work. Invocation, by contrast, is a calling of the force inward, into yourself. So rather than being in your circle and evoking the spirit into this triangle outside the circle and really focusing on that sort of the external aspect there, this is very much a bringing inward. You generally would use this for absoluthic, briatic, and high yetzeratic entities like gods, goddesses, archangels, angels, and forces of a similar stature. The magician aspires to embody the nature of the force invoked. So in working with evocation and invocation over the years and thinking about these definitions, both in theory and in practice, I came up with a rule of thumb that has served me pretty well in terms of knowing when to evoke versus invoke, and keeping Crowley's comments in mind as well. And the rule of thumb is that if you want all of yourself to be more like the entity, invoke it. If, on the other hand, you want the entity to do your bidding and be an extension of yourself, evoke it. So think about the nature of the entity in question and ask yourself, is my true will calling me to make all of myself be more like this thing? And if your answer to that question is not a resounding yes, then you might want to think about whether this is something more suitable for evocation. So, take that for what it is, which is advice from one magician, but think about it as a rule of thumb that you might want to use yourself. So with that set of preliminaries accomplished, let's turn our attention to the main topic here, which is, of course, invocation. Now, there are two types of invocation, and generally speaking, and you might want to refer to the Living Thelema segment on ritual construction for an expanded discussion of these two kinds of invocations, and also how to fit them into a larger ritual structure. But just as a brief reminder, you have general invocations, which bring in a more or less undifferentiated magical force. It's like plugging the TV into the wall socket. You've got power to the device. Examples of this would be the anthem from the Gnostic Mass, the preliminary invocation from the Goetia, in other words, Liber Samec style rituals. Ultimately, invocations taught to you by your own HGA will be the most useful and most potent example of general invocations. This will be, for you, the best way to get power turned on to that TV. Now, after you've got power on, you really want to tune that TV to the right channel, and that's the specific invocation. You want to not just have force, but you want the specific kind of force that you need. So for this, you would use, for example, specific rituals like pentagram rituals for elements, hexagram rituals for planetary and zodiacal invocations. You might use prayers to specific gods, or rituals devoted to specific gods, like Liber Israfel, as an invocation of Thoth, Hermes, and so on. So this is where you really tailor the energy to the specific magical aims that you have. Again, you might want to look at my ritual construction episode for more on this. In any case, especially with regard to specific invocations, there are a few tips that are going to amplify your ability to do powerful invocations. And I'm going to go over a few of those, interspersed with some commentary by Crowley from Magick in Theory and Practice, Chapter 15. A very interesting thing happened when I started planning this talk, and I realized that a lot of the tips for good invocations, for effective, powerful invocations, are also tips for good sex. So listen carefully and see what you think. You may get helped in more than one area of your life by listening to these podcasts. Who knows? The first tip I want to throw out is that it helps to first personify the god outwardly and then embody it. So the general movement is from relating to this external thing and then eventually arriving at the place where you are living out the nature of that thing. So you first describe the god as vividly as possible, ritualized prose, poetry, whatever you've decided to do. Then you begin to act and speak as the god would. So again, that's that movement from outer to inner. By doing this, you become a veritable talisman of the god. You have created the proper form that attracts the desired force. Once again, refer to documents like Liber Israfel for examples of ways to really build that structure of ritual form with words, with incense, with symbols, and so on, so that the proper force is drawn to it. In Magick in Theory and Practice, Crowley also gives 3 non-ritual tips for assisting with really embodying the god and getting inside the head of the god, so to speak, to be able to embody it. The first of these is to master the use of the astral body, like the neophyte does in AA. And master the technique of rising on the planes, and then use that skill to explore symbols and astral realms that correspond to the nature of the god. So you begin to be more fluent in the symbolic language of the god. Another technique Crowley recommends is to use a mantra suitable to the god. Some of these, we have examples of from ancient times in terms of mantra that would be used. Plenty of examples of this in Crowley's writings. Finally, he says you can get a lot of mileage out of embodying the astral form of the god, to assume the god form, literally. And for examples of this, you might want to look at my descriptions of the god forms used in Liber Resh, from the very first Living Thelema segment. And building the skill of assuming god forms becomes an indispensable magical technique that you'll find yourself much more effective in your ritual work once you can, like flipping on a switch, become a god by practiced use of assuming astral forms like this. So personify the god, then embody it. The second tip I want to give to you is to address the multifaceted nature of the God. This is one way of describing and personifying the God for the sake of the overall invocation process. And one of the best published examples in Crowley's works of a technique for bringing in the multifaceted nature of a deity and then integrating that into a ritual structure is from Liber Astarte. And I'm going to briefly review the instructions from that document in terms of how to construct a sevenfold invocation poem or, set of stanzas. Quoting, "First, an imprecation, as of a slave unto his lord, and the desired quality here is awe. Second, an oath, as of a vassal to his liege, with the quality of fealty. Third, a memorial, as of a child to his parent, and the quality of dependence. Fourth, an orison, as of a priest unto his God, adoration. Fifth, a colloquy, as of a brother with his brother, and the feeling is one of confidence. Sixth, a conjuration, as to a friend with his friend, and the quality of comradeship. Seventh, a madrigal, as of a lover to his mistress, with the quality of passion." So you can see how these are 7 different, what do you want to call it, emotional tones, I guess, of relationship to the deity. And if you can explore all of them and flesh each of them out in terms of how you would relate to the God in question, then you've got a more powerful poetic invocation. Did a Liber Astarte, more on Liber Astarte in my devotional practices segment, if you want more on this. The third tip is incredibly important, and probably most important of anything, and that is to inflame yourself in prayer. Crowley describes this as the whole secret of the process. You lose yourself in the frenzy of your adoration. This may be due to the words, the ideas, the images, the incense, the dancing, the wine in some cases. Let me read you Crowley's words from chapter 15, because they're incredibly, as you might expect, incredibly well chosen by Crowley. "The mind must be exalted until it loses consciousness of self. The magician must be carried forward blindly by a force which, though in him and of him, is by no means that which he in his normal state of consciousness calls I. Just as the poet, the lover, the artist, is carried out of himself in a creative frenzy, so must it be for the magician. It is impossible to lay down rules for the obtaining of this special stimulus. To one, the mystery of the whole ceremony may appeal. Another may be moved by the strangeness of the words, even by the fact that the barbarous names are unintelligible to him. Sometimes in the course of a ceremony, the true meaning of some barbarous name that has hitherto baffled his analysis may flash upon him, luminous and splendid, so that he is caught up into orgasm. The smell of a particular incense may excite him effectively, or perhaps the physical ecstasy of the magic dance. Every magician must compose his ceremony in such a manner as to produce a dramatic climax. At the moment when the excitement becomes ungovernable, when then the whole conscious being of the magician undergoes a spiritual spasm, at that moment must he utter the supreme adjuration." A little bit later, he says, "Suppose the supreme invocation to consist of 20 to 30 barbarous names. Let him imagine these names to occupy sections of a vertical column, each double the length of the preceding one, and let him imagine that his consciousness ascends the column with each name. The mere multiplication will then produce a feeling of awe and bewilderment, which is the proper forerunner of ecstasy." So, really mind-blowing, simple yet mind-blowing stuff here. It reminds me of Crowley's writings in the Scholion of Liber Samech, where he's giving these inner tools of working with the symbols and the ritual procedures. These are handholds, but incredibly important handholds in terms of developing the inner calisthenics necessary to vault yourself into states of spiritual ecstasy, and that's the essence of inflaming yourself in prayer. Another technique that helps with this. Is this sounding like good sex tips yet? I think so. If not, so far, this one certainly will. Stop short of the climax, repeatedly, by strength of will. Again and again and again, until it doesn't even occur to you to stop yourself. This ensures the appropriate level of inflaming. Crowley comments on this particular aspect. He says, this forgetfulness must be complete. It is fatal to try to let oneself go consciously. Inhibition is no longer possible or even thinkable, and the whole being of the magician, no minutest atom saying nay, is irresistibly flung forth. In blinding light, amid the roar of 10,000 thunders, the union of God and man is consummated. So that's incredible writing, and a perfect encapsulation of this technique in terms of the ingredients that really make it work. So moving on, once you have decided on the force, and this is another tip entirely here, once you have decided on the force to be invoked for the purposes of the overall ceremony, focus only on invoking that force. Forget about the purpose of the ceremony. Crowley says the failure to do this is actually, in his mind, the single most common source of error in invocation. We get into the lust of result. We start thinking about what we want, and is this going to work, and what am I going to do when I get that thing I want, and maybe subconsciously, what are the reasons I shouldn't get the thing I want? All kinds of messes can occur when we lose sight of simply bringing in the force. So we should trust that when we've crafted a magical aim and we've crafted a ritual designed to bring that aim to fruition, we can forget about that and simply start the machine and watch it go. And a big part of the fuel of that machine, of course, is going to be the ability to bring in the force. And we should just focus on that. So those tips are, the main thing I want to offer you today in terms of approaches to strengthen and empower your magical invocations. But I want to conclude with some thoughts on a different plane related to what we've been talking about, and that is that I think you can see, if you look at the course of a proper and powerful invocation, it mirrors the process that the aspirant goes through in the approach to adepthood and the flowering of that adepthood in the outer life. So consider this, that when you inflame yourself in prayer, and you make your whole life into a suitable invocation of the HGA and a talisman of the formula of the HGA, the force is naturally attracted. You, as I've said in other contexts, you become a lightning rod and naturally attract the force which is drawn to that. The lightning of the HGA strikes you because that's the nature of the form you have taken, and that's the nature of the force that is drawn to it. So in the AA, the grades from probationer through dominus liminis essentially amount to an ever-increasing inflaming in prayer through not just the specific tasks of the different AA grades and the mechanics of it, but through the process of crafting yourself into the proper form, living your whole life in a talismanic state of consciousness increasingly, so that natural law itself will demand that your holy guardian angel is drawn to you consciously. Naturally, the HGA has been there the whole time. It hasn't been on vacation somewhere else. You just have to get your head in the right place. Then, in uniting with the HGA, the knowledge and conversation, the ecstatic union at Adeptus Minor, this is like the climax of an invocation. It's that moment when, as Crowley was saying in what I read earlier, you vault past any conception of the individual self into this spiritual ecstasy, and as he says, the union of God and man is consummated. So that happens specifically in the climactic knowledge and conversation working, of course, but that whole time of life of the adept who is attaining to that stage on the path is going to have this character. It's going to take on the character of the union of God and man, God and woman. Not just that moment of that climactic working in your retirement, but the whole process of coming into union inwardly and outwardly with the HGA. And then, importantly, the next step for the adept is to go forth in the world essentially as the prophet of the Holy Guardian Angel. Your thought, word, and deed embody the word of the angel. Your will is aligned with the angel, for they have always been one. And for the outer life of the adept, this is the Adeptus Major grade and beyond, when the whole outer life becomes a living out of the true will that has been discovered through conscious union with the angel. This is the macrocosmic mirror, if you like, of what you would do in a single ritual working, where once the invocation has come to a climax, then you are acting as the god, right? You are attaining the magical aim of the ritual by virtue of having brought the god into you, and then embodying the force to get what you wanted from the ritual. But again, in life, in the big sense, in the path of the adept, this is Adeptus Major and beyond, where your entire life is a living forth of the formula and will of the HGA, which is yours. So, just a few additional thoughts related to invocations, but kind of taking it into a larger scale. I want to suggest, if you want some homework to do as a result of listening to this segment, that you might consider using those materials that I was reading from Liber Astarte and crafting your own 7-part invocations based on those instructions. Then practice delivering those invocations and see if you can strengthen the muscles of devotion within yourself by that practice. You will undoubtedly find that to be a useful skill if you work on it. So I hope this has been useful information today, and I just want to close by mentioning, as you may have heard, that I do have a book coming out based on the Living Thelema segments that I've been doing here for the last 3 years. The book is going to be released later this year, later in 2013, and it's going to be based on the content of these segments, but with expanded discussion, additional resources, and more surprises that we'll talk about later. But listen to Speech in the Silence and watch the Living Thelema Facebook page for announcements in the coming months. I think it'll be something you'll enjoy. Please, as always, send your questions and comments to me at david@livingthelema.com. That's david@livingthelema.com. Visit the Living Thelema Facebook page and engage in questions and discussion and interaction there. And visit livingthelema.com for resources related to the various segments and for my bio in case you want to learn more about my work. Thanks, as always, for listening. Love is the law, love under will.